Number 10. Born in January of 1800, Millard Fillmore was the first president born in the 19th century. At the time of his birth, John Adams was the president. Prior to Fillmore, 8 presidents were born before the nation was founded, 2 after the founding but before George Washington was elected, and 2 during Washington's presidency. George Washington died a month prior to Fillmore's birth. Number 9. Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore had never met prior to the 1848 election, when they were elected president and vice president. Fillmore was a lawyer and politician, and Taylor a lifelong military man, so they never crossed paths. As Taylor hadn't attended the Whig National Convention, they didn't even meet until after they were elected. As was custom at the time, the vice president had very little influence on the presidency. Number 8. Fillmore's presidency was only 2 years and 7 months, but it was the closest thing to a full Whig term that the nation ever saw. Technically, there were 4 Whig presidents, but William Henry Harrison died only a month into his term. His vice president, John Tyler, served out nearly 4 full years, but spent most of his term as an independent, as he was expelled by the Whigs. Zachary Taylor's term was only a year and 4 months. Number 7. In the 1848 election, Southerners accused Fillmore of being an abolitionist. This was very far from the truth. He was morally opposed to slavery and never owned slaves, but thought the abolitionists were dangerous radicals. In letters during his post-presidency, he expressed annoyance that slavery continued to be the #1 issue in the nation, as he hoped it would eventually subside. He blamed both abolitionist and pro-slavery advocates for the increasing national violence in the 1850s, and when it came to voting for president, he always supported, quote, "whom I deem best and safest to govern the country." Number 6. Fillmore came from poverty. He grew up in a tiny log cabin and watched his father toil away on a small plot of land, only for that land to be taken away in a title dispute. This convinced young Fillmore that he never wanted to be powerless in such a situation. He began teaching himself and reading at every opportunity. As a teenager, he worked at a textile mill. He left a dictionary open and would memorize words as he worked. He was eventually offered a job as a law clerk. After that, he worked as a teacher and then a lawyer, and by 28, he was elected to his first public office. Number 5. Fillmore didn't vote for Abraham Lincoln in the election of 1860 or in 1864, seeing him as too extreme. Nevertheless, he generally kept these opinions private. Publicly, he was very supportive of Lincoln during the war. At least compared to some other presidents of the era, Lincoln liked Fillmore, once writing, "I have a high opinion of Mr. Fillmore's judgment. He was a good president." Number 4. Fillmore's father didn't only live to see his son rise out of poverty, but also become president. Nathaniel Fillmore even visited the White House in 1851 when he was 80 years old. He lived until 1863, 10 years after his son's term ended, and died at age 91. Number 3. Starting in 1855, 2 years after his presidency, Fillmore spent over a year in Europe. During his trip, he met Pope Pius IX and Queen Victoria. The 36-year-old queen supposedly described Fillmore as the most handsome man she'd ever seen. Fillmore also ran into former President Martin Van Buren, who was also coincidentally visiting Europe. Van Buren was 72 and hadn't been president for 14 years. Number 2. New York, Fillmore's home state, has produced 5 presidents. The only states that have produced more are Ohio and Virginia. Fillmore was the second New York president, with Van Buren as the first, Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt as the third and fourth, and Donald Trump as the fifth. Number 1. Though Fillmore was a Whig president, he'd been part of many parties throughout his life. The Know-Nothings, the Democrats, and his first, the Anti-Masonic Party, a party that rose up in opposition to Andrew Jackson. The Anti-Masons claimed that Jackson was an elitist as he was a member of a secret society. When Fillmore entered politics at 28, he did so as an anti-Mason, but within 5 years he joined the Whigs, as many anti-Masons did. Ironically, he ended his life as a Democrat, though the political landscape was drastically different by this point. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and donating on Patreon. Donations from $2 to $15 a month help towards more frequent uploads. Patreon link in the description below.